Coming up on this Monday edition of Newsline at noon, President Park Geun-hye briefly meets with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Singapore and says Korea, China and Japan should push ahead with agreements reached at their recent trilateral foreign ministers meeting. Wednesday marks 1 year since Bank of Korea Governor Eoh Jin-joo took office. Analysts say the series of surprise rate cuts show his lack of communication with the markets. Plus, DNA belonging to 78 people has been found at the site of the Germanwings air disaster. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's new Monday, March 30th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. It was brief and only a few words were shared, but President Park Geun-hye briefly met with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe at a reception following Kuan Yew's funeral in Singapore.
Well, Prime Minister Abe thanked President Park for making a recent trilateral foreign ministers meeting with China a success. The Korean president said the three countries should take necessary steps to carry out what was agreed at the talks. There have been speculation over what the two leaders might say to each other in Singapore, as they haven't yet held official talks amid strained bilateral ties over historical and territorial differences. And during her trip to Singapore, President Park also met with Chinese Vice President Li Wenchao. Both expressed hopes for closer coordination on the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, following Korea's announcement last week that it would join. And staying in Singapore, Singapore and the world bid a final farewell to the city-state's beloved founding father Lee Kuan Yew on Sunday. President Park, who had maintained close relations with the former prime minister, attended his funeral along with dozens of other world leaders. Chew-sun reports.
Under a heavy downpour, thousands of Singaporeans packed the streets of the city-state on Sunday to express their love and appreciation for Lee Kuan Yew, who died Monday at the age of 91. From the Parliament House, where the body has been laid since Wednesday, the former Prime Minister's coffin made a final tour of the city, the place of Lee's 6 decades-long political legacy. Dozens of former and current world leaders came to pay their respects at the state funeral. President Park Geun-hye, whose special relationship with the former Prime Minister dates back to her father's presidency in 1979, was also there. In the condolence book, she wrote that Lee was a monumental leader whose name will remain forever engraved in the pages of world history. Outside the funeral venue, people gathered at tribute sites across Singapore to remember the statesman recognized for transforming the former British outpost to a global trading and financial hub in just a single generation.
He was a great man. Without him, Singapore will not be what it is today.
What he has done is we've never expressed in words. We really appreciate. That's why we are here to pay tribute to him.
Even those who didn't support Lee's policies on dissent and public order expressed their appreciation for the leader, adding he was like a very strict father.
As I travel around the world and seeing, other countries and comparing to what Singapore has today, we come to realize that what he did was actually for the best for his nation and for his people.
President Park, who returned to Seoul early Monday, has said she hopes to enhance bilateral ties with current Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong. This, as Seoul, with its growth initiatives, seeks to learn from Singapore's rise to a global financial and distribution hub after overcoming similar obstacles like a lack of resources and a complex geopolitical environment. Chew-sun, Arirang News.
Inevitable, that was how Japan described a formal apology for its historical wrongdoings back in 1948. That historical record comes from documents released by Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry on Monday. Now, according to Seoul's Foreign Ministry, on the released documents, President Chun Doo-hwan's Tokyo trip back then, Hirohito expressed regret over its colonial rule from 1910 to 1945 and said its historical atrocities should not be repeated. When the Korean government was preparing for Chun's trip, documents show the main agenda was whether Hirohito would comment or apologize for his historical wrongdoings during Chun's trip. Before Chun traveled to Japan, Korea said the Japanese emperor should express remorse over its historical wrongdoings, and Japan also believed it was inevitable to comment on its history. It was the first time for a Japanese leader to comment on the controversial history issue.
Now, the possible deployment to the Korean peninsula of a U.S. missile defense system called THAAD has been causing quite the stir in recent weeks. The U.S. is pushing to have the system in South Korea to defend against North Korea's missile threats. But does THAAD work that well anyway? In testing, it looks pretty good, but a defense official in Washington says the system is far from foolproof. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
In flight testing, THAAD's hit rate is as impressive as it gets. Tested 10 times between 2007 and 2013. The U.S. missile defense system has a track record of 100% mission success. However, that hasn't stopped some defense experts in the U.S. questioning how reliable it really is. In a report submitted to the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee last week, the Pentagon's Director of Operational Test and Evaluation, Michael Gilmore, said the system has not shown steady progress in its ability to shoot down ballistic missiles in their terminal phase, pointing to examples where the system has some glitches and poor weather conditions during tests. Gilmore stressed that it was important to fix the problems at hand, as THAAD is supposed to be able to work at any time. He also highlighted the need for better training programs for troops who operate and maintain THAAD. The defense official noted that simulators used to train soldiers how to use THAAD are not a completely accurate representation of how the system works in real life, which could lead to errors when intercepting missiles. THAAD has been a hot topic of debate in Korea, as the U.S. has been pushing to deploy the system to South Korea, saying it'll better protect the country against North Korea's ballistic missile threats. Both governments say, however, that the issue has not been formally discussed. But with U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter scheduled to visit Seoul early next month, watchers speculate THAAD could be on the official agenda. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, the leaders of the two main rival parties are in Seoul's Gwanak-B district today, throwing their weight behind their by-election hopefuls. The main opposition party, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, is concerned about losing its usually safe seat as former presidential candidate and ex-lawmaker Jong Dong-yong on Monday announced that he would run as an independent candidate in the district. Now, the NPAD worry that Jong's decision to run and his push to create a new opposition party will split the Liberal vote. In what will be a litmus test ahead of the upcoming general election, the ruling Saenuri Party and the NPAD will battle it out in the 4 constituencies up for grabs on April 29th.
For this week's Industry Insight, we're going to take a look into Korea's hotel industry. World-famous hotel chains may have an edge in Seoul when it comes to brand recognition, but when it comes to customer preference, the winner is not an international franchise.
And as our Song Ji-sun tells us, there's a new trend towards diversification in the industry that's helping local chains weather unexpected changes.
Korea has its fair share of global luxury hotels. But when it comes to selecting a venue for celebrity weddings or hosting VIPs, it's the local chains that shine. In the latest survey on preferred hotel brands, local chains like Shinla and Lotte came out on top over internationally renowned brands.
The service standards set by global brands may not necessarily reflect the unique service expectation and culture of the local users. On the other hand, local brands like Shinla and Lotte have spent many years researching the specific needs and preferences of Korean guests and fine-tuning the product to their needs.
Domestic hotel chains also have an advantage when it comes to revamping their facilities. They have a proven revenue stream that's separate from the hospitality side of the business.
Korean hotels may be better known for hosting VIP guests like foreign leaders and providing venues for celebrity weddings. But the big money doesn't come from room rates or from the high-profile functions. Most of the revenue actually comes from their duty-free businesses.
Lotte and Silla dominate the local duty-free market, and they're also expanding overseas to airports in Singapore and Guam. They've also been quick to get a jump on a different segment of the local hotel market. The two domestic chains are building new mid-range and business hotels, catering to visitors seeking budget rooms with quality services. And given that Korea's hotel industry is expanding by the year, especially with the rapid rise in the number of Chinese tourists to Korea, the hotel room supply is expected to fall short of demand, especially in the capital. Experts say these moves to diversify are helping the industry become more resilient, but they also point out that the local chains must prepare for changes in the market, like the recent drop in the number of Japanese tourists to Korea on the back of the weekend. They encourage hotels to devise strategies for attracting visitors from a variety of countries to mitigate the volatility in the industry. 송지선, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at noon with Mark Broome and Eoh Jin-joo.
I'm Eoh Jin-joo with
Market researcher, strategy analytics said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
Almost 1 year has passed since Bank of Korea Governor Eoh Jin-joo took his post last April. He started out strong, receiving a favorable evaluation from the market and political parties. However, over the course of his first year, those early good impressions have faded a touch. Shin Se-min reports.
Bank of Korea Governor Eoh Jin-joo has received some criticism in the new report, which finds that he could do more to foster communication between financial bodies and the public, and that he has lost the public's trust. That's the exact opposite of what Lee promised to do last year when he took office. A total of 3 rate cuts affected his assessment. Lee changed his fiscal policy course from maintaining to slashing the interest rate from 2.5 last August to 2.25%. Last month's rate cut to 1.75 came as a surprise, shocking many market watchers. Snowballing household debt is fueling more dissatisfaction with the BOK governor, as well as the country's continuing feeble economic growth. Despite 3 cuts to the key rate since Lee took over, fears of rapid deflation still linger. Korea's economic growth rate also fell from 1.1% in the first quarter of last year to 0.3% in the fourth quarter, staying in the 0% range. Some pundits point out, however, that the country's dull economic outlook and its discouraging figures cannot be blamed solely on the governor. External factors such as slow global economic recovery on top of tumbling oil prices have also played a role in the economic slump. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korean manufacturers are feeling slightly more confident about the economy this month, but they still feel uncertain about future prospects. According to the Bank of Korea, the March Business Survey Index, or BSI, for the manufacturing sector increased to 77, up 3 points from the February reading. Anything below 100 means pessimists outnumber optimists. Large conglomerates are responsible for a large portion of the BSI rise due to increased export expectations based on low oil prices and the weak Korean won against the U.S. dollar. However, looking ahead, the pessimists prevail. Korea's business outlook rating for April dropped 2 points from the previous month, a reflection of weak economic projections due to sluggish domestic demand. By sector, small and medium enterprises reported the biggest drop in confidence.
A widely expected US rate hike and lower global oil prices are hinting at trouble for emerging economies and in turn raising concerns for Korea. The nation's outbound shipments to emerging economies have already been on a decline, and experts say this is likely to continue for some time. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
Korean exports to emerging economies took a dive in the first 2 months of this year, casting a cloud over the nation's economy. According to Statistics Korea on Monday, Korea's exports to 18 emerging economies came to nearly $37 billion in the January to February period, down 6.2% from the same period a year ago. The decline is 3 times bigger compared to Korea's total exports, which dropped about 2% in the cited period. Emerging economies include China, Russia, and India. The decline is a concern for Korea as emerging markets make up about half of its exports, accounting for 45.1% in 2013. But that figure fell to 43.9% last year. Experts say the fall is linked to a widely expected U.S. Federal Reserve rate hike this year. The rate increase could trigger a rush of capital, which can weaken currencies and hurt stock markets. This, coupled with a sharp decline in global oil prices, has hurt oil-producing nations, some of which are also emerging economies. Korea's exports to these countries fell 4.4% in the first 2 months of 2015 compared to the previous year. Given these global conditions, experts say Korea's export outlook remains unclear, and export growth will likely be in the 1% range, down from 2.3% last year. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korea and Vietnam have initialed their free trade agreement following a series of bilateral trade negotiations that were completed late last year. Korea's trade ministry said on Sunday that the deal was done in Seoul on Saturday. The two countries aim to formally sign the trade pact within the first half of the year and put it into effect before the year is out. Now, under this deal, Korea and Vietnam will remove import tariffs on more than 90% of trade items except for rice, which is a sensitive item for Korean farmers. The Trade Ministry expects the deal to help Korea's small and mid-sized businesses, particularly those in textiles, auto parts and electronics, to expand their exports to Vietnam.
Time now for a look through the global headlines we're following on this Monday lunchtime from Seoul. For that, we connect to our Eunice Kim at the News Center.
Eunice, let's begin with the recovery efforts in the French Alps. And progress is being made as more than half of the 150 people who died in last week's Germanwings plane crash are said to have been identified now.
Right, Mark. The impact of that crash had left not a single body intact, so experts are relying on DNA to identify the passenger and crew. Recovery teams are also carefully combing the incredibly steep mountainside for the second black box that holds the clues to still lingering questions regarding the circumstances of the plane's sudden descent. Our Kuan Yew has the details.
Forensic teams have made progress in their examination of hundreds of body parts located at the Germanwings crash site in the French Alps and have so far identified the DNA strands of 78 victims. Experts say DNA samples from relatives as well as dental records, fingerprints and accessories have helped the process. The search for the second black box is still ongoing, shown in this on-site footage recently released by France's Interior Ministry.
The digital flight data recorder, which is made of electronic components and records all the data from the flight, is very important for the rest of the investigation.
Experts say that if the 10-kilogram black box has not been completely pulverized or destroyed in any other way, it will be buried under rubble and debris. A road is being built to give all-terrain vehicles access to the remote site to help the removal of large parts of the plane. It could be completed by Monday night local time. German media has been reporting on the black box recording of the final terrifying minutes of the ill-fated flight. Co-pilot Andreas Lubitz, who is assumed to have purposely crashed the plane, tells Captain Patrick Sontheimer that he can go to the toilet at any time. When the captain does step outside, the sound of Lubitz locking the cockpit door can be heard. Shortly after, there's a bang and Captain Zontaima is heard shouting, "For God's sake, open the door," amid the screams of petrified passengers. This as reports surfaced over the weekend that said Lubitz may have not been fit to fly last Tuesday, possibly suffering from a detached retina. They also cited investigators as saying that he was treated by several neurologists and psychiatrists and that a number of prescribed drugs were found at his apartment, suggesting the 27-year-old was a deeply troubled man. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And with the likelihood that Flight 9525 was crashed by its co-pilot on purpose, the debate over pilot-less planes has been revived. For more on what it would take to get such a plane off the ground, here's our Kim Ji-yeon.
Speculation that a 27-year-old co-pilot intentionally crashed a plane has led some to question whether planes might be safer without pilots. Advocates of the idea say that if planes were fully automated, the tragedy of Germanwings Flight 9525 could have been averted. The co-pilot has reportedly prevented the captain from re-entering the cockpit after he left, before sending the plane into a descent that led to the crash. The disaster has already led to calls in Europe for a rule requiring that 2 pilots be in the cockpit at all times. Self-flying aircraft that can be controlled from the ground are not entirely new. Drones have been used for military missions for years. The U.S. military flies Global Hawk drones nearly the size of a Boeing 737 passenger jet, and Boeing says it's developed fully automated planes to prevent hijackings. But barriers remain to get the technology off the ground. For one, insurers are unlikely to cover commercial planes that fly without pilots due to the potential unreliability involved. Then there are labor unions, which are concerned that self-flying planes will leave pilots without jobs. Critics also say self-flying aircrafts have their own problems, including an increased vulnerability to hacking. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And a giant swing to the right in France's local elections on Sunday in what could be a sign of things to come in future legislative and presidential votes. Exit polls showed that French voters handed the conservative UMP party and its allies as many as 71 council seats out of the possible 98. UMP is led by former President Nicolas Sarkozy, who is widely speculated to run again in the 2017 presidential race. Meanwhile, the ruling socialist and leftist parties took a beating, with only 28 to 37 council seats projected under their names. Sarkozy called the results a massive rejection of François Hollande's policies, which had failed to turn around a slumping economy. And tough choices still lie ahead for Iran and the 6 world powers, trying to reach a deal before time runs out in less than 48 hours. Tehran and the U.S., China, Russia, the U.K., France, and Germany have been locked in talks in Switzerland to reach a deal that would curb Iran's nuclear activities and also roll back crippling economic sanctions. Among the main sticking points is how long Iran would be required to cap its nuclear program. The world powers want to progressively remove the uranium enrichment program after the 10-year commitment, while Tehran wants the cap removed completely thereafter. Tuesday is the self-imposed deadline to agree on a framework, while a comprehensive deal is aimed for by June.
Good afternoon. It feels like we are having 2 seasons in one day. Temperatures started out in the single digits, but will break into the 20s, leading to early summer-like conditions this afternoon across the nation. And areas of lingering and dense fog should gradually burn off, and some blue skies will dominate the whole peninsula. But it's not a good idea to be outside this afternoon. A relatively high level of fine dust is still sticking around, including here in the capital. So unlike we anticipated, the level is going up higher each hour. So have that protective mask with you before heading out. On that note, let's take a closer closer look at the readings for today. The daytime high here in Seoul will jump up to 20, and Daegu and Gwangju will rise to 24, while Busan peak at 19 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon should see a high of 19 and 23, while Dokdo tops out at 15. Now we'll have frequent days of moisture this week, so keep the umbrella handy. And it seems like daytime highs will be somewhat cooler, but lows will rise to even things out. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Newsline at Noon.
Join us again at the same time on Tuesday. Thank you for watching.